Well guys, as you can see from the beginning of this video, we are working on the Shop Talk Tuesday Kukri build. This guy right here. Now, in that first clip, what I was working on was just kind of refining the plunge line area with the hand file. And the whole point behind that was I wanted to use that bigger round file to just make it a gradual slope from the ricasso down into the bevels right there, so you can see how much of a gradual slope it is right there. I didn't want that super hard line where the plunge line was, because with this particular style of blade, it's super flowy, you know, it has nice curves to it. I didn't want this rigid line going through here, so I wanted it to be a real gradual slope down into the bevels, and I think that this is gonna look better whenever we get the blade finished and all that. Now, what I did off camera from the filing to now was I hit it with a 50 grit belt and just got rid of the file lines, and then hit it with a Scotch-Brite belt, and that's where we're at right now. That is this finish that is on here, is just 50 grit and then Scotch-Brite. So went ahead, did that, got everything cleaned up. Now what we need to do in this episode is we need to heat treat this, so we're going to be doing that next. So heat treat it, we're going to file test it, then we're going to go ahead, clean everything back up, you know, maybe do a little bit more work on the 2x72, bring the bevels up the rest of the way, and then go ahead, hand sand it, and then we've got to put the finish on it, which is going to be a acid etch and stone wash, which you probably already know because you saw the thumbnail. So we're going to do that. I think it's going to turn out really nice. I think that finish is going to contrast really well with the copper and the handle material that we're going to use, which you'll see in the next video. Now, we will be doing some of the copper stuff in this episode, but, you know, we won't be doing the main handle part until the next episode. But we're going to go ahead, get out there, start doing the heat treat process for this. We got to normalize it, then we got to heat treat it. So let's go ahead, let's jump into that part and get it knocked out. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to start off with a 120 grit, go up to a 220, then a 320, and then end with the 400 grit before we end up acid etching this. We don't need to go too high on the grits because we are going to acid etch and stonewash. But the goal here was originally to hit it with the 2x72 and bring the bevels up the rest of the way, but they're already pretty much all the way to the top. And because I'm starting with a 120 grit, I'll finish out the bevels sanding and bring them all the way up to the swedge. Now the goal here is to sand on the bevels, then sand on the swedge, sand on the bevels, sand on the swedge, and get the line to where the swedge meets the bevels to match up with the spine as it comes down. So this is almost a flowing line here. It won't be exact because of the dip that's right here, but it'll be pretty close to that. That's the goal at least. Now back to sanding. So now at this point, we've done our 120 grit on this side, and we sanded with it going back and forth right here. Now with the 220, we're going the opposite direction, this way. So we're going up at an angle, and then whenever we do the next grit, we're going to go back and forth again, and then up at an angle with the 400, and then basically we'll just correct everything at that point. But the whole point behind switching directions is whenever we initially ground the bevels, all of the grinding lines were going this direction. So with the 120, we erased those lines. With the 220, we erased those lines. With the 320, we erase those lines, and so on. That's why you're switching grits, because once we start sanding this way, we're going to sand until there's no more lines going up and down like this, and then just keep going with that. Makes it a lot easier to figure out if you've got scratches hidden somewhere. If we were to have sanded the whole entire time this way, we might not find out that we have a scratch in it until the end when we start etching and it really stands out. So we're just counteracting each grit as we're going up. But one of the things that I am doing is I am concentrating on this area right here, because I do want it to still keep that gradual slope, and then I want to make sure that everything flows in how it's supposed to. So when we're getting up in here, we're just sanding up to the ricasso and that plunge area, and just making sure that that transition is nice and smooth. And then over here, we're just doing big draws. So now we need to focus on the copper part of, well, okay, so that doesn't look much like copper, but give me a second. There we go. Well, you can actually see the copper on there. So what this was an old mirror that they used and put nickel on the front of it and then polished it up, and that's how they got mirrors, I guess, a while back. So I have a whole bunch of this, and I use it for different things, liners, for Mokamegane builds, stuff like that. But we're going to use this as the layer that we need for the knife handle. So basically we just need to go through and mark out the handle area that we're going to be cutting out, get it cut out, and then start kind of playing with it to figure out exactly where we want it to land on here. So that's what we're going to do now. Alright, now that we have our copper pieces made and we have our maker's mark on here, I went ahead and cleaned everything off and then wet the blade a little bit. We're going to go ahead, fully submerge it, and we're going to etch it for probably about, I think I'm going to do 15 minutes and then let it sit like that for, so 15 minutes and then clean it, and then 15 minutes again, clean it, and then stonewash it, and we should be good. I think it's going to look really good though. So we got it acid etched. Of course it looks good like this, but I do still want to stonewash it. I think it's going to give it that little extra something. So we're going to do that. We're just going to be using a little handshake method. Now of course, knife is quite a bit bigger than this, but for the actual blade, it'll fit in there just fine. All we're going to do, coat the blade a little bit with some WD-40. It's going to go in here with our little aquarium rock and WD-40 solution. Stab it in there. Barely fits. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to gradually shake it down. Now with this, if you're going to do the handshake method, you don't really need to do it for very long. Do it for about a minute. We're just going to go a bunch of different directions. This way, that way, this way. All the different directions, because you don't want the rocks to just scratch one direction. But the whole stonewash, you want it to go everywhere and put the little scuffs everywhere in it to make it more uniform. Now check that out. Nice stonewash finish. I like it because it tends to make everything crisp up. Like these lines, the transitions from the bevels into the swedge, the plunge lines, everything stands out real well. Now, in the outro, I'm going to show you what it looks like with the copper on here. So we'll get to that. Alright guys, now I know that y'all kind of trust my design aesthetic and everything that I typically do, and maybe this build is going to make sense, maybe it's not going to make sense. Either way, I think that you're going to like this. So, remember, these of course are it's just a layer. The actual scales are going to end right about right here. So this section of copper that has been hammer finished is going to be exposed on both sides. So that texture that's right there, and I mean look at how much contrast there is between the copper and the spine, and then going into the texture on the ricasso, and then going down into the blade. Just this nice transition with contrast is just beautiful. Now when it comes to, you know, the way that I like to do things, I want it to be something that is just slightly different than what you typically are going to see. And again, I saw kind of different versions of this at Blade Show in Atlanta, where they were kind of using copper and bronze in different ways. So this was my interpretation of some of those builds. Now, I love the way this is looking, and I think that whenever you see the actual handle scale material that we're going with, which is actually right here, that's about as close up as you're going to get right now. That particular material with the copper, with the actual dark finish on the blade, I think it's just gonna look super awesome, stand out an absolute ton, and just look really cool. But as of right now, there we go. Y'all tell me what y'all think about this in the comment section down below. I'm really interested to hear what y'all think. Guys, if y'all would, give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, go check out my website, theriversexperience.com, scoop you up a t-shirt, get yourself some merch, a mug, maybe a knife. Everything helps out with the actual shop build that we're doing during this process. Guys, thank y'all for coming by. Y'all have an amazing day. Y'all stay safe out there. I'll catch y'all next time.